On a cold winter evening in 1757, a quiet man stood among silk coats and powdered wigs inside the most powerful palace in Europe. He did not shout. He did not run. He did not hide his face. In his pocket was a small knife, the kind used by servants to cut bread or string. In front of him walked a king believed to be chosen by God himself. One quick movement shattered that belief. The blade barely broke skin. The king did not die. He would live for many more years. Yet what followed was not forgiveness, nor mercy, nor even swift justice. What followed was 83 days of pain, planned with care, written into law, and carried out in the name of order. This was not a punishment meant only for one man. It was a message meant for an entire nation. In the center of Paris stood a square where power spoke through bodies, where justice was not whispered in courtrooms, but screamed from scaffolds, where suffering was slow, public, and impossible to ignore. On that square, the state would show what happens when an ordinary man touches what is declared untouchable. The story of François Damiens is not only about a failed assassination. It is about fear dressed as law, about belief enforced with iron, about how authority reacts when its sacred image is cracked, even slightly. The wound healed. The punishment did not. What happened next would horrify a city accustomed to violence, disturb philosophers, and leave a mark on history that fire could not erase. This is the story of how a small knife exposed the cruelty behind absolute power. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. François Damiens was not born into greatness, danger, or ambition. He did not come from a famous family, nor did he grow up surrounded by politics or power. He was born in 1715 in a small rural area of northern France, the son of poor farmers who worked the land with their hands and expected little more from life than survival. From the beginning, Damiens lived a life that history usually ignores. As a young man, he drifted from place to place, never settling for long. He worked as a domestic servant in different households, performing simple tasks, cleaning rooms, carrying messages, opening doors, running errands. He owned few possessions and left almost no trace behind him. People who knew him later described him as quiet, awkward, and unremarkable. He was not violent. He was not clever. He was not a leader. He was simply there. Paris in the mid-18th century was a city of noise and ideas. The streets were crowded with carts, beggars, merchants, priests, lawyers, and soldiers. Churches were full. Taverns overflowed. Pamphlets passed from hand to hand, filled with arguments about religion, power, and truth. For a man like Damiens, these voices were everywhere and impossible to escape. Over time, Damiens became deeply affected by religious disputes tearing through French society. The Catholic Church was divided between two powerful groups, the Jesuits and the Jansenists. Their arguments were complex, filled with words like grace, authority, and salvation. Most people barely understood the details, but they felt the anger and fear surrounding them. Sermons spoke of corruption. Pamphlets accused kings and priests of betraying God. Courts punished some believers while protecting others. Damiens listened. He stood outside churches, listening to sermons meant for educated men. He lingered near courts where lawyers debated religious law. He read pamphlets written by people far more educated than he was. Much of it confused him. Some of it frightened him. All of it left him with a growing belief that something was terribly wrong. Slowly, Damiens became convinced that King Louis XV was responsible for the suffering of the church. In his mind, the king had chosen the wrong side. He believed the king protected the Jesuits and crushed those who opposed them. To Damiens, this was not just politics. It was a sin, a crime against God. But Damiens did not join a movement. He did not speak publicly. He did not organize meetings or write letters. His thoughts stayed inside him, growing heavier over time. The more he listened, the more alone he became. He had no one to correct his misunderstandings, no one to challenge his fears. In this isolation, an idea began to take shape. It was not detailed or logical. It was emotional and confused. If the king was harming the church, then stopping the king might save it. Damiens did not imagine himself a hero. He did not think about consequences. He believed, in a simple and dangerous way, that action itself was necessary. Versailles, the king's palace, was not protected like a modern fortress. Hundreds of people moved through its halls every day. Servants, petitioners, tradesmen, and courtiers passed freely. The system relied on tradition and respect, not suspicion. No one expected violence. No one searched pockets. No one questioned a man who looked ordinary. Damiens visited Versailles several times. He watched. He waited. He learned the rhythms of the palace. He carried a small knife, something many servants owned. Nothing about him raised alarm. On the evening of January 5th, 1757, the king walked through the palace as he had many times before. The court followed its usual pattern of bows, whispers, and movement. Damiens stood among them, unnoticed. He did not run. He did not hesitate. When the king passed close enough, Damiens raised his hand and struck. In that single moment, an invisible line was crossed. A servant had touched a king. A belief that had lasted centuries cracked. And the world around François Damiens was about to close forever. The knife entered the king's body for only a moment. It passed through heavy winter clothing, layers of silk, and stopped after a few inches. It did not reach the heart. It did not pierce a lung. It did not cut a major vessel. Yet the sound Louis XV made as he cried out echoed through the marble halls of Versailles like thunder. For a brief instant, no one understood what had happened. The palace had always moved with calm certainty. Violence was something that happened far away, on battlefields or in dark alleys, not inside gilded corridors built to glorify royal power. When the king stumbled backward, clutching his side, the illusion shattered. Courtiers screamed. Guards rushed forward. People pushed and scattered in panic. François Damiens did not flee. He stood still, the knife still in his hand, as if frozen by what he had done. Within seconds, guards seized him, forced him to the ground, and tore the weapon from his grasp. Hands struck him. Boots pressed into his back. His face hit the stone floor. The king's son reached him first, supporting his father as blood stained the white silk of his coat. A priest nearby hurried forward, and the king, believing he might be dying, began to confess his sins. He spoke of God, of the state, of unfinished duties. For those watching, it seemed as though France itself might be about to collapse. But when physicians arrived and examined the wound, the truth became clear. The knife had struck a rib and stopped. The injury was painful but not deadly. The bleeding slowed. The king's breathing steadied. Within hours, he was speaking clearly, giving orders, demanding answers. Louis XV would live. The relief inside Versailles was enormous, but it quickly turned into something darker. The question was no longer about the king's health. It was about what the attack meant. For the first time in generations, someone had violated the sacred body of the monarch. The king was not supposed to be touchable. He was believed to be chosen by God, protected by divine will. That belief held the entire structure of absolute power together. A servant with a small knife had broken that illusion. News spread through Paris at terrifying speed. By nightfall, rumors filled the streets. People whispered of secret plots, foreign enemies, and hidden armies. Some claimed Protestants were behind it. Others blamed political rebels. Many believed a great conspiracy was unfolding beneath the city. The authorities reacted with fear. City gates were closed. Extra guards were placed throughout Paris. People connected to religious disputes were arrested without clear evidence. Houses were searched. Letters were seized. The state needed enemies to explain what had happened. François Damiens was taken to the conciergerie, a grim medieval prison beneath the heart of Paris. Its stone walls had held thieves, traitors, and condemned men for centuries. Inside its dark cells, light barely entered, and time seemed to stop. Damiens was alone, injured, and terrified. Interrogations began almost immediately. Magistrates demanded names. Who helped you? Who paid you? Who planned this? They expected resistance, lies, and hidden connections. What they did not expect was Damiens' answer. Again and again, he said the same thing. He had acted alone. No one had helped him. No foreign power had paid him. He had no letters, no allies, no plan beyond his belief that the king was harming the church. This answer made no sense to them. In their world, crimes against kings were never simple. They required planning, money, and networks of traitors. A single man acting on confused religious ideas did not fit their understanding of power. His explanation felt more dangerous than a conspiracy, because it suggested that belief alone could threaten authority. They questioned him for hours. They tried kindness. They tried threats. They promised mercy if he revealed his accomplices. Damiens repeated his words until his voice grew hoarse. There were no accomplices. The magistrates did not believe him. They could not. If he spoke the truth, then the state had no enemy to punish except a single, broken man. And that was not enough to restore the damaged image of royal power. So they turned to a tool that the law allowed. A tool meant to force truth from the body when the mind refused to cooperate. They prepared to ask the question. In the legal world of 18th century France, truth was not always expected to come from words. When testimony failed to match expectations, the body itself was used as evidence. Pain was believed to be honest. Suffering, carefully controlled, was thought to unlock secrets that reason could not reach. This belief was written into law. The practice was called the question. It was not a moment of rage or revenge. It was procedure. Judges followed rules. Torturers followed instructions. Doctors stood nearby, not to heal, but to measure how much pain a human body could survive. The goal was not death. Death ended usefulness. The goal was confession. For François Damiens, the question began in a stone chamber beneath Paris, lit by flickering torches. The air smelled of damp walls and old blood. Iron tools rested against the walls, polished from use. Men who worked there had done this many times before. They were not cruel in their behavior. They were professional. Damiens was tied to a chair. His legs were placed inside an iron frame known as the boots. The metal pressed tightly against his knees and shins. Wooden wedges were prepared beside him. Each wedge was smooth, measured, and numbered. The magistrates sat at a table. One of them asked again if Damiens wished to confess and reveal the names of those who helped him. Damiens said no. He said there were no names. The first wedge was hammered in. The pain arrived suddenly, sharp and deep. Damiens cried out, his body jerking against the restraints. The second wedge followed. Then the third. With each blow, the pressure increased, forcing his knees inward, crushing muscle and bone together. The pain became overwhelming, yet the process continued slowly, deliberately. 4 wedges were the ordinary level. 8 were extraordinary. For crimes against the king, the law allowed more. They drove in 12. Between screams, Damiens repeated his answer. He acted alone. No one helped him. No one planned it. His voice broke. His words did not change. When the session ended, his legs were ruined. His knees were damaged beyond repair. He could not stand. He could not walk. He was carried back to his cell, shaking and barely conscious. Blood pooled beneath him. Doctors examined him the next day. They recorded every injury with calm detail. Broken bones, crushed joints, nerve damage. Then they made their decision. He could survive more. Weeks later, the second form of the question began. This one attacked the body differently. Damiens was strapped to a wooden board, tilted so his head was lower than his feet. His arms and legs were bound tightly. A device forced his mouth open. Cloth was pushed deep into his throat. Water was poured. It flowed continuously, soaking the cloth, filling his mouth, his nose, his lungs. He could not swallow. He could not breathe. His body fought violently, desperate for air. Just as he reached the edge of unconsciousness, they stopped, allowed him to gasp, then began again. This continued for hours. Between cycles, magistrates asked their questions again. Who sent you? Who paid you? Who else is involved? Damiens, choking and shaking, gave the same answers. No one. The torture did not reveal a hidden conspiracy because none existed. But the suffering served another purpose. It broke his body. It displayed the state's determination. It created a record of obedience to law, even as it destroyed a man. After 83 days, the interrogations ended. The truth no longer mattered. The crime itself was enough. François Damiens had touched the king. The law now turned from questioning to punishment. By late March of 1757, François Damiens was no longer a man in the ordinary sense. His body had been damaged beyond repair. His legs were twisted and weak. He could not stand without help. His hands shook. His face showed the marks of weeks spent underground, away from sunlight, away from kindness, away from hope. Yet the court was finished with questions. What remained was judgment. The Parliament of Paris, the highest court in the kingdom, gathered to decide his fate. This was not a debate about guilt. Damiens had already confessed to the act itself. He had struck the king. That single fact outweighed everything else. The only question left was how the crime of touching the king's body should be answered. In the eyes of the law, this was not attempted murder alone. It was something far worse. It was an attack on divine order. The king was believed to rule by God's will. To strike him was to strike at heaven itself. Ordinary execution was not enough. The punishment had to restore fear. It had to speak clearly to every person in France. The sentence was long. It was read slowly. Each part had meaning. Damiens would be taken to the Place de Grève, the public execution square of Paris. There, before a crowd, his flesh would be torn with red-hot pincers. His right hand, the one that held the knife, would be burned with sulfur. Molten lead, boiling oil, and melted wax would be poured into his wounds. Finally, his body would be pulled apart by horses. After death, his remains would be burned. Nothing would be buried. Nothing would remain. His name would be erased as completely as possible. This sentence did not shock the judges who wrote it. They followed old legal traditions, punishments designed centuries earlier for crimes against kings. But even in that violent age, such sentences were rare. Many had never seen one carried out fully. The date was set March 28, 1757. News spread quickly. Paris prepared. The place de Grève was transformed into a stage. A large scaffold was built at the center of the square. Guards surrounded it. Wood was stacked nearby for fires. Tools were prepared with care. Executioners practiced their roles. Everything had to be done correctly. This was not chaos. This was ceremony. On the morning of the execution, people arrived early. Thousands gathered. Vendors sold food and drink. Families brought children. Wealthy citizens rented windows and balconies overlooking the square. Some came out of curiosity. Some came out of fear. Some believed it was their duty to witness justice. François Damiens was brought from his cell in a cart. He wore a simple white shirt. His body could barely support itself. He leaned against the sides of the cart as it moved through the streets. People shouted insults. Others stared in silence. When the cart reached the square, the noise rose. Guards pulled him onto the scaffold. He looked out over the crowd, faces stretching as far as he could see. He was alive. He was conscious. The punishment was about to begin, and it would last far longer than anyone expected. The first scream rose above the square like a warning. When the red-hot pincers touched François Damiens' flesh, the sound that left his body did not resemble a human voice. It was raw, desperate, and impossible to ignore. The crowd reacted instantly. Some leaned forward. Some stepped back. Some covered their faces. The executioners worked exactly as the sentence demanded. They were careful. They were precise. The iron pincers glowed orange as they tore flesh from Damiens' arms, chest, thighs, and legs. Each wound smoked in the cold air. The smell of burning skin drifted across the square. Damiens remained conscious. Priests stood nearby, urging him to repent, to think of his soul. He spoke when he could. He asked God for forgiveness. He did not accuse anyone. He did not curse the king. His body shook violently as pain overwhelmed him again and again. Then they burned his right hand. Sulfur was applied, and flames consumed the hand that had held the knife. The crowd groaned as one. Some spectators turned away. Others stared, unable to move. This was not the quick justice people expected. This was slow. This was endless. Next came the liquids. Molten lead, boiling oil, and melted wax were poured into open wounds. The effect was immediate and horrifying. Damiens' body arched against the restraints. His screams weakened into broken sounds. Time seemed to stretch. Minutes felt like hours. Even those accustomed to violence began to feel uneasy. Women fainted. Men lowered their eyes. Some people left the square, unable to watch any longer. But thousands remained, frozen by a mixture of fear and fascination. The final act was meant to end it. 4 horses were brought forward and tied to Damiens' limbs. The ropes were pulled tight. Drivers urged the animals forward. The horses strained, hooves slipping on the stone. The crowd held its breath. Nothing happened. Again and again, the horses pulled. The body did not separate. Hours passed. The executioners exchanged anxious glances. This was not how it was supposed to end. The spectacle was failing. Magistrates were consulted. Laws were reviewed. Finally, permission was given to cut the joints to allow the sentence to be completed. Knives were used. The horses pulled again. At last, the body gave way. François Damiens lost consciousness. His suffering ended. What remained was treated with care. Every piece was gathered. Everything was placed on a prepared fire. Wood soaked in oil burned fiercely as flames rose high into the sky. The scaffold itself was burned. Ashes were collected and scattered. Nothing was allowed to remain. As night fell, the fire was still visible across Paris. The square slowly emptied. People walked home in silence. The festival mood of the morning was gone. Something had changed. The king's wound had healed. But Paris had seen something it could not forget. By the next morning, the Place de Grève looked ordinary again. The scaffold was gone. The ashes had been swept away. People crossed the square on their way to work as if nothing had happened. Officially, François Damiens no longer existed. His body was destroyed. His name was not to be spoken. The state believed the lesson had been delivered. But memory does not obey orders. Across Paris, people talked quietly about what they had seen. In taverns and private rooms, the execution returned again and again in whispered conversations. Some said justice had been done. Others said the punishment had gone too far. Even those who believed Damiens deserved death struggled to defend the way it had been carried out. Writers, philosophers, and observers recorded their reactions. Men who had seen war and cruelty admitted they were shaken. They described turning away, covering their ears, feeling sick for days afterward. The execution did not strengthen faith in royal power for everyone. For many, it revealed something disturbing beneath it. The king returned to his life. His wound left little mark. He ruled for many more years and died peacefully in his bed. The machinery of monarchy continued to function, but something invisible had shifted. The idea that power could demand such suffering in the name of order stayed in the public mind. The punishment was meant to frighten. It succeeded. But it also taught another lesson. It showed what the state was capable of when challenged. It demonstrated that law could be used to justify cruelty, that ceremony could hide violence, that belief could demand blood. Years passed, then decades. Within a single generation, France would explode into revolution. Kings would fall. Scaffolds would rise again. This time, they would work faster. The guillotine would replace horses and fire. Violence would be justified with new words, new ideas, and new promises. Those who watched nobles die had grown up hearing stories of executions like Damiens. They had learned that power speaks through bodies. They had learned that fear can be manufactured. The lesson meant to protect the monarchy would be reused against it. François Damiens did not change history by his hand. His knife failed, but the response to it exposed a truth that could not be erased. Absolute power, when threatened, does not always appear strong. Sometimes it appears desperate. Sometimes it reveals its cruelty more clearly than its authority. The fire at the Place de Grève destroyed a body, but it could not destroy the question left behind. When a state punishes a wound with hours of suffering, who is truly being judged? The man on the scaffold, or the power that placed him there? That question would burn long after the ashes cooled.